remote access was so uncommon, but today, with internet access being so common and turned on all the time,
Yeah.
it's a lot different today, where we have continuous connection as opposed to the intermittent dial-up connection like we had in the war games days.
Yep. 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 I agree. And, I would say the threat landscape has changed so considerably now with respect to, there's so much money in this. I mean, and, in some respects, these criminal organizations, they run just like normal businesses. They have developers, they have like almost salespeople with the ransomware for as a service type of approach with Ruck or SamSam now. I mean, they've got like PTO and payroll, and I mean, they run like businesses, but their businesses is inflicting pain and hardship on other organizations. And the last thing I'll mention with that, with respect to the criminal enterprise here, you got to remember, I mean, this isn't happening, at least for the most part, here in the United States. These are groups that are operating typically in Russia, Eastern Europe, China, North Korea. They're operating in places where I'm not going to say it's necessarily encouraged, but it's not also necessarily illegal. Like, I cannot imagine the FSB is going to arrest a hacker in Moscow for breaching a US-based organization, especially given today's climate. And the laws and regulations of the U.S. start and stop at our borders, folks, and so these groups, they almost can operate, dare I say, with impunity, because there's nothing really that can stop them. And they make so much money doing this. It's a billions of billions of dollars industry.
Yeah. Yeah. And I just see that again continuing to be larger. And when we look at some of the direct attacks on financial systems, like the SWIFT breaches that have occurred. SWIFT is the international money transfer mechanisms. Not to mention the attacks on banks and other financial institutions. I mean, we can just go on and on and on this, but it's about the dollars, and it's about the power on this stuff.
Well, I think that's as good of a time here as any to start with our first review question here. And what are the main motivations for data breaches? So, Randy, what do you think it is?
Well, the options here of financial gain, espionage, and ideology, we've actually talked about all of those, as it turns out, Steve. So my vote is going to be for all of the above. I think that makes sense. And there's more. Those are just three of the motivating factors.
Convenience, there's secondary reasons. I mean, there's a lot. And so while each answer is independently correct, the most correct answer would be all of the above, as all of them, for various different reasons, and sometimes two or three reasons. Let's not forget the fact you can combine these if you really wanted to as well. Can be reasons for why an organization might experience a data breach. Sometimes, frankly, the other piece I'll say of this is coincidence too. Sometimes like these people breach something and then it's like, oh, they have an RDP set up, a Roma desktop to another organization, and it's just might as well go and breach them too. Sometimes it could just be straight up convenience.
Yeah. And, like you said, a combination here where you might have an ideology and you're using the financial gain to fund it. So all of a sudden you're getting leverage.
Yep. So, this is coming, this next part here about the standard procedure with respect to data breaches. Obviously, there could be individual breaches, have individual steps. Some of these breaches can be incredibly complicated and sophisticated. Did you ever read about the great bank heist in Bangladesh? A couple years ago. I mean, if you're not familiar with it, if you Google bank heist Bangladesh, ransomware Bangladesh, it's an incredible story. Most likely it was North Korea that was behind it, that almost resulted in the country of Bangladesh having their entire monetary reserves stolen for the country, like $1 billion in hard currency. They ended up losing about 100 million, but it's which is still horrific. But it's a really, really fascinating story with huge, complicated scheming and plans and steps, and sometimes it's just really simple. You click on a link you shouldn't have clicked on and you download ransomware and you have to pay $1,000 to get your data back. But from my mind, Randy, I think if you really kind of boil it down, three main steps: you compromise, you exfiltrate, and you monetize. Does that sound about right to you?
It does, in fact, because the compromise, sometimes you'll hang out and just kind of lurk around seeing what the opportunities are. And the time that a breach occurs to the time it's actually monetized may be long, to the point that it may be hard for you to discover exactly what time you were compromised. In other cases, the bad actors will start, right away working on this because they don't want to squander their opportunity now that they're in there. So they'll immediately go to work stealing the data or infecting the systems, if you will. But those steps seem to me to be pretty common in almost any breach.
Yeah. Yeah. And, a lot of people, like if my mother was here, she'd say, well, why would anybody want to breach me? Why would anybody want, my data? And it's the reality of, at least from my perspective, it's a numbers game 99 times out of 100, unless you're a notable company, a celebrity. For us common folk here, our simple podcast folks like us, it's really, you're a number on the list, you're an IP address on their roster, and you're a business address that they know about. And if they can't get to you, they just move on to the next person, but it's not personal, it's just business in the words of the Godfather.
Yeah. And, to a degree, if we keep it personal for just a minute, it's almost like dumpster diving for identities. People used to go to the trash cans and try to steal information so they could breach accounts, and they'd do that in neighborhoods. But if you consider today that many people have a home computer and they have a lot of information on that home computer, iPad, phone for that matter. And if the bad actor could get your bank account information and could get your insurance policies and could get the title to your property, and
it adds up really quickly. I get it.
Them, right? So, and there has been actually quite a run of, car title and land title transfers. And then people go to sell their home and they realize, well, you don't own it anymore.
Yeah.
Well, I never sold it. Well, yeah, you did. And here's the documentation. So it can happen at the personal level. And it's really going to the easiest target. And what we're going to try to also teach you as we continue here is how to become a little less of a target.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, I would say just it's minimizing your vector, minimizing, the amount of space, air, land, your digital footprint, if you will, to make it as secure as you can and as small as you can. Now, I was skipping ahead a little bit here, but since you brought up the timeline of the attack, this actually is coming from a DBIR report a little ways back, but and they haven't published this since. So this data is a little bit old, but I cannot imagine it's any less relevant today, which is the timeline before the compromise occurs, and after the timeline. Have you ever seen this chart before?
I have. In fact, I like this one. I wish they would have an updated version of this, but I'm like you. I don't think that it has likely varied a lot. But fundamentally, friends, this attack idea is that, most compromises are done in a few minutes. Now, I will disclose to you, an associate of mine and I often have competitions to break into. In the old days, we used to break into CPA firms in front of CPA firms in an audience. And the two of us would just ask for a firm who thought they were very secure, and then we'd proceed to break in. And both of us were pretty quick. Most of the time we could do it in less than a minute. I got a little slower over time. The other guy was a little quicker, faster typer, a little more experienced. But normally we could break in less than a minute. And sometimes the firms would discover them quickly, but as this chart illustrates, only 3% are discovered quickly in a few minutes. It turns out that 68% or 2/3 go almost, months without being discovered. So now just kind of picture somebody's in your system and they're wandering around pretty much without anybody asking or discovering them for months. How much data do you think they can get? How much damage do you think they could do? It'd be like somebody wandering around your office and nobody asking, who are you?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, I think, what this really kind of speaks to is reality versus what expectations are. I think most folks think that, these things are, take a long time to plan and an even longer time to execute. But in reality, again, it's a numbers game. It's just, they go on. If they can't breach you, they go on to the next one, But if they get in, this kind of speaks, I think, to, let's call them detective controls inside your organization. Most detective controls aren't really that good. If you're a big business, even then it can't be great. I mean, I'm reminded of the Equifax data breach where that went on for, I believe, about 3 months. I'm reminded of the Yahoo data breach that went on for like 10 years. The reality is, if they can get in, the first thing they do is they put in procedures to keep them hidden, to stay in as long as they can. Even, for example, we're not going to talk about this today, but the supply chain data breaches of, like, for example, I'm reaching for it here. Help me out. Last year with respect to, the network monitoring software company.
SolarWinds.
SolarWinds, yes, yeah. Thank you. I mean,
sorry, I was leaving you out there because I'm like, where is he going? Is it
There's been so many.
Is it SolarWinds? What's he talking about here?
Yeah, no. I get it. Yeah, and with the SolarWinds breach, I mean, same thing. I mean, that went on for, frankly, if you haven't updated, it's still going on. But I think most folks just don't realize that data breaches is just like a moment in time. It can go on for a very long period. And at least as of this report, and again, I think this came out in the 2021 or 2019, at the time, 70% will go on for months. And the data and the reports that we have about this really kind of do illustrate that they do go on for a long period of time.
And there's lots of them. I mean, you heard me just trying to rescue Steve there a little bit, and he was asking for help, but there were so many of them. It's like, which one do you want me to talk about? Because,
I know.
I named 2, but I bet you there's 20. And in fact, I've gotten to the point I don't follow these as close as I used to, simply because there's, without exaggeration, dozens per day. Mm-hmm. And then the question is just how severe they are. And, he happened to pick a pretty severe one, which, by the way, compromises infrastructure, read nuclear reactors, read, other things that, if somebody got in and started playing with the nuclear reactor like they did with the Florida water system, same type of breach, it could not end well. Yep.
Yeah, and frankly, I will say with the SolarWinds breach in particular, it breached every executive agency of the U.S. government, from the Department of Energy to the DoD, and I think like 90+% of the Fortune 500 as well. And
that's correct.
If you're interested in that, definitely check out what are called supply chain data breaches, which are an increasing. I think I saw one statistic said they're up 650%. And the idea behind this is that you might be strong and secure, but is every company you buy and license and update and download software from secure? And the answer is not always. And in that particular breach, a very, very well-known, widely supported company, again, used by 100% of the U.S. executive department, they experienced a data breach. Their customers thought they were updating and getting safe and secure software, but the software that they were updating through their standard update channels, in fact, contained malware that caused breaches on their side. And I don't think we'll ever know the full extent of all of that.
No, as a matter of fact, I know that some organizations that are infected are trying to make sure that doesn't get out.
Right? How can you?
Yeah, you don't really want it to that way. So, when you think about these various reports, the CrowdStrike report, which is a very intelligent AI-based protection system, points out that, data breaches rarely involve just a single computer or, endpoint that's targeted. Usually what they're doing is they're using that as the gateway to get to everything inside your organization. And literally, the bad actors, when they get in, will move from one compromised asset to another. A lot of times the computer host. And that time is really basically called the breakout time. And the average breakout time now is a little less than 2 hours, 1 hour and 38 minutes, according to the CrowdStrike report. And we have seen many organizations where the breakout time is, a few minutes, 10 or 15 minutes. It's rare that it's long. So the real question we want to ask here is, can your organization respond quickly enough to recognize there's been a breach and respond? Can you mobilize your entire organization to get everything protected and shut down in 90 minutes, which is maybe what this would say? And frankly, a lot of people would be thinking, we've got some sort of computer problem, the internet's not working right, and you'd fritz around for 10 or 15 minutes before you realize something is really severely wrong here, right? And so you'd squander a bunch of your response time. And I just don't think many of our organizations can move that quickly. We don't have the surveillance tools like CrowdStrike in place. And even if you have CrowdStrike, sometimes it's not in CrowdStrike's capabilities to recognize a particular breach yet. So that can happen pretty doggone quickly.
Yep, it can. And I mean, even under the best of circumstances, your Fortune 500, your big tech companies, government agencies, it's not only, it's never going to be solely just a technology. It's going to require skilled, competent people with experience to be able to recognize when these types of breaches occur. Security is not just a computer thing. It's not just installing anti-malware solutions or putting a firewall in place. It's about having competent IT staff that can be able to manage this and wrangle the people inside the company, but then also having good staff that are educated on what to do and not to do and be able to recognize when a threat occurs, and frankly, that's difficult even under the best of circumstances. So
Under the best of circumstances, in fact, I have begun using the catchphrase that these security responses and all of this that we're talking about is actually a process, not a project. A lot of businesses think they can just do something and that protects them. No, it's continuous. And when the vendors are selling these protection services, security operations centers oftentimes, what they're trying to promote is that they have the capabilities of watching this stuff and responding. And they do, but I'm still not convinced even those are quick enough in response.
I agree. So let's go ahead and have our second review question here, Randy, which is something we just discussed here. What does the eCrime breakout time measure? And again, this is a metric coming from that CloudStrike report here. The correct answer here is going to be it's the time it takes for an adversary to move laterally within a network. Often, I'll use the Equifax breach as an example. The bad actors found one bad system, and I'm using bad, with quotes here. Really, it was just a system that had not been updated. There had been a known zero-day attack. Equifax had not updated that system to patch that zero-day attack breach. Somebody found out about it, was able to get in, and often it's easier to get in once you're through, the castle walls. You can walk freely among the castle here. It's the same thing with that breakout time. Once you're kind of past that initial thing and you're in the network, you could start walking around and finding stuff quickly. And the correct answer here is, again, being able to get in and then move and be able to infect other stuff. And so the other options here, it's not the time it takes to compromise a network. It's not the time it takes to resolve from a data breach. And it is not the time for law enforcement to respond. It's just the time it takes to move within the network.
Yeah, and see, this breakout time that we've just mentioned is about an hour 38 in the current stats. Notice that the threat actors may get in a few minutes, like we just had also discussed. And resolving data breaches,
long time.
Most of the ones that I see are long time, days and weeks, sometimes even months. And then the response for law enforcement to these, it's also exceptionally long. And, a whole bunch of these cyber crimes are not resolved.
Yes, I agree. And, I'm willing to bet we hear about maybe 5% of all of data breaches that occur. I mean, if you're a business and you don't have any public disclosure requirements, why would you go and tell people this occurred? It's not going to help you. So, well, moving on, let's go into our final section for today and just kind of summarize, I think, maybe 2 or 3 of the main attack types that are out there. And these again, also are coming from the DBIR report, and I've provided some additional guidance from additional reports as well. And the DBIR report summarizes and classifies these different types of attacks into about 6 or 7 main attack types. And obviously there's nuance and specific types of approaches. Certain criminal organizations like the Ruck group or the SamSam group they've got their own specific flair, just in the same way I can get, a million different types of burgers or pizzas, it's the same types with these attacks. There's all individual specifics, but they really kind of fall down into, again, 6 or 7 main types here. We've got our web application attacks, breaking and compromising systems. We've got denial of service, DDoS, distributed denial of service, all the way down to just, social engineering and privilege misuse. We're not going to go through every one of them. I think we'll just pick maybe 2 or 3 of these that I think are of the most interest. But Randy, maybe take a look at this chart here. Maybe give me some of your take on this. This is looking at the different attack types over time from 2017 to today. Anything stand out from you with respect to, looking at these different attacks over time? Like, are you surprised that intrusion's higher now than it was previously, or social engineering isn't lower than what we expect? Anything kind of stand out from you as being particularly interesting?
Well, I was probably a slow responder to this year's release because I'd thought about this since March. So this is not like a, today thoughtfulness,
Mm-hmm.
but the trend lines here and the way that they've woven them in the current graphics from the Verizon report are fascinating. Clearly, you can see the radical increase of system intrusion that occurred related to the pandemic, I suspect, and the
That's a
ability
good
to break
point.
into systems from people's homes because we had home workers working from home that didn't have enough security, and it became a quick way in to corporate networks. So that was one of the big upticks as I saw it there. Now you'll notice because that was so rewarding. We could get in so well. Some of the other attacks didn't make as much sense. So notice social engineering dropped off. Now, social engineering continued the uptick in the early part of the pandemic, but people were instructed, I think, to be aware of these social attacks, and they became more comfortable in that light. But I think the trend down on social engineering, the basic web attacks, and the miscellaneous errors all dropped. Now, it does depend on what region of the world you're in, too,
Of
Steve,
course.
because basic web attacks are still very high in the GCC, United Arab Emirates, and Oman, and places like that, and in Africa, because the systems there are not as sophisticated, so the bad actors can use a simpler attack method, which the basic web attack is. And you saw the kind of big uptick that was going on with basic web because when the economies were what they were in 2018 pre-pandemic, places like the UAE were doing very well, and you could break into systems there with very simple attacks. So I think those are kind of the big things. You'll notice that some traditional things like privilege misuse and lost and stolen assets and so forth have all trended downward. I think that's because the rewards of the other methods are better.
Well, the thing I will specifically add about, I think the privilege misuse too. I think some of the authentication has gotten better too, with the more people being aware of two-factor authentication, and also with respect to strong passwords. It doesn't make as much sense to steal somebody's password if you're just going to get hit with a text message requiring you to put in a code. And I also think the other piece of this too is I think businesses have become a lot more aware with respect to their insider and privilege misuse. And to be clear on this, we're talking about when people do unapproved things here, that they're using their own account. So why would I go and steal or perpetrate, data theft when it's just going to be attributed to me? They're going to say, oh, it's on Steve's login, and that's what happened. And I think that's probably part of the reason we've seen that kind of trend down that way.
Yeah, and you're on spot on that because multi-factor authentication has been required by cyber insurance policies more and
Yes.
more over the last 5 years, let's say. And in fact, the newer policies right now are requiring to re-authenticate at least twice a day, not just once. So you're going to see even more of that. But MFA, in my mind, was mandatory for these
Absolutely.
privilege situations. And those continue to improve and become simpler to use and more widespread.
I know so many tax accountants that are so frustrated, starting first and foremost with my father, the fact that they have to put in their password now on their tax application programs. I feel like every about, inactivity of like 30 minutes or more, they got to re-authenticate to prove that they are who they are. And I think it's really to kind of produce this specific risk and exposure. But, folks, something I often say is that there's a direct correlation between, password, like security and convenience. Something that's more secure is generally less convenient. Things that are more convenient are generally less secure. And you got to find that healthy middle ground where you're not killing people with just 16 character passwords that have to be changed every 12 hours, and passwords that could be 10 characters long with no special characters and changed every 10 years. Like, there's got to be a balance, because really you can't just kill your people with security. Because I think in some respects there is diminishing returns with this. Like, at some point, you stop getting some of the benefits, but at the same time, you can't have nothing, because then you're just leaving yourself open for risk and exposure. Now, Randy, from my perspective, something that just seems to be a product of a bygone era, but yet still absolutely seems right on top of today. And if we look at all the reports, almost all of them indicate that social engineering is something that still is super common and almost always at least a element of major data breaches. It seems like we should have resolved this 15 years ago, but yet it's still here. What's your perspective? Maybe define this for us, and then what's your perspective on this particular attack type today?
Yeah, so the social engineering approach is trying to discover enough information about users that you can use that to get inside the system. Now, simple examples in the old days would have been able to maybe guess people's passwords because they knew your school's, mascot, those type of things. But today, I think a lot of these attacks are still against more significant people inside the organization, higher up, people in positions of authority. So CEOs, managing partners, that class. And that, I think that happens because they're busier. And I think it also happens because the value of getting their credentials is more. And so that vector seems to be good. Now, I don't mind disclosing to our listeners, I have had fairly high titles across the organizations I participate in, and I get social engineering attacks on the rate of multiple per day. And it's clear they're social engineering attacks to me, and I think I'm being wise about avoiding them. But some of them are so good at times, it's like, oh, that's from one of my employees, or, oh, that's from a client. Yeah, it's like, oh, good. So that's the idea of this. They're less common than they were, but I think they're used for, more significant victims.
I've been waiting to share this, but it's so perfect. Like, how many of you, just think to yourselves quietly, how many unsolicited text messages do you get? How many unsolicited emails do you get? How many phone calls now? I mean, I get people calling me constantly, with the spam phone calls, and they're not always spam. I mean, yeah, you got some of them that are obviously spam, for example, the car warranty one, which I feel like that's the attack du jour. But there's so many of these people that are trying to scam you, and ultimately it's social engineering. They're trying to con you. It's a con job. And I got this right when we started our podcast today, and it's a text message, and it says, "Hi Jez, I'm Lisa. I can't come to the party tomorrow. I have so much to worry about. Can you help?" And again, I don't know who this person is. What they're trying to do is to kind of create some sense of urgency. They want me to engage and be like, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. How can I help?" Or whatever it ends up being. But I mean, we're getting hit with these constantly. You have to be so vigilant, folks, because everybody's trying to scam you. And it might just be scamming you out of money, and it could be something much more pervasive and something much more detrimental, where they're targeting you because of who you are. And, if they can compromise you, then they can compromise the organizations you're a part of. Now, one other tech type, and that's probably what we're going to have time for today here. We'll save ransomware and malware for our next episode, which are absolutely worthy of their own full discussion. But let's talk about the other main vector and the other type of main attack that I think really affects business folks, which is a BEC attack, or business email compromise attack, which is essentially an extension of that social engineering. And it just seems, Randy, that email has been and probably will be for as long as I'm in practice, the main communication vehicle for business. The bad actors know this, and they're constantly barraging us with emails now that sometimes look so darn good that it's almost impossible sometimes not to click on them. I mean, what's your take on the BEC attack type?
Well, they truly are aggressive. The earlier stats said that 84% of all cyber attacks were distributed by email. That number, I think, is true. That number does go up and down over time. We can put some protections in front of our business email, and it's clear that, major vendors like Barracuda as an example, Mimecast as an example, Microsoft has their advanced threat protection and other protections on email nowadays. It is clear that the bad actors know that they can get there. And, that goes back to one of our fundamentals in this area on business email. Never open an attachment and never click on a link in an email unless you're expecting or know who it's from. And even at that, a lot of times I won't click on an email. I'll pick the link up and go on from there. But basically, the other thing that you've said, Steve, is a change in business email compromise. In the old days, graphics weren't quite right, misspellings were common, things were fuzzy. Now they're gorgeous.
Yeah.
And I would tell you that most of the business email compromises I've seen are so good, I can't tell them from the real deal other than they're just suspicious. In other words, the spelling's right. And even this, the style of the writing can match the person that they're trying to portray they are. So it's a big deal.
Yeah. Yeah. And what I have here is just an example of one I got by email not too long ago. And obviously this is, I would say with the more discerning or savvy of users, I think we can spot 90% of them, maybe even 95% of them. And this is clearly a very poor one. They could have included the Shell logo and made it a little bit less blocky. And obviously it's so clearly over the top, $500 gift card, but it's a numbers game for these people. You send out 2 billion email, inevitably, even if 0.01% click on it, I mean, that's still thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of people even. And that's all it takes, to really kind of make it. I mean, the ROI on these attacks for these people are so high because you're operating again in countries where there's pretty much no risk. It doesn't really cost much to be able to do this. I mean, you can inflict a lot of damage with almost no overhead. And they've gotten much more sophisticated too, as you mentioned. I got one. It was specifically emailing me, because I'm a partner in the firm, and it was from one of my staff. Now this staff happened to be my wife, Alicia, and she's also our marketing director, asking me to change her the payroll bank account, and saying that she had bought a new bank account. I looked up the routing number; it was for a bank in I think it was Hong Kong, and it's like, oh, that's really interesting. I never knew my wife was banking in Hong Kong at the moment, but had the same email signature, the logo at the bottom. It looked like it was a spoofed email. I knew it was bad because it came up with a insecure email. But I mean, again, you could do this very quickly. You could do it for a lot of people, and they specifically targeted me. And I'm guessing they got the info from LinkedIn, from our website. We obviously have lots of stuff on the web. So, you just need to realize as a financial professional, as a leader in your business, you're going to be targeted. And they could look as silly as this one that we have on the screen to being really sophisticated. And the only thing I regret is I didn't take a screenshot of that email, that fake one. I would have loved to have shared it with y'all. So Randy, we're coming to the end of our time here. Why don't we go ahead and close with one review question, and then we'll maybe summarize what we'll cover in our next episode here. And so here's our next review question. I'm going to let you respond to it. What is the intended outcome of a social engineering attack? What do you think the correct answer here is?
Well, in this case, we've got 3 things for you to consider. The victim willingly provides their social security number to the adversary. The victim will willingly download malware to their device. The victim willingly violates a security principle, or all of the above. And I believe that each one of those, again, is correct. If you can get a social security number, that's good. If you can download malware, that's good from the bad actor's perspective. And, if you do something like click on a link or open an attached file, that's a problem. So I think all of the above is the best of the answers.
I agree. I think each answer is individually correct, but in the context of this question, all of these could be intended outcomes of a social engineering attack. Ultimately it's a con job. It's fraud. They're trying to do something, and it could be an angle of identity theft. It could be an angle of getting you to download something, then cause a data breach for your organization and more. But I would tell you, be vigilant. You have to be careful about what you click on, what you read. In our next episode, I think what we'll probably discuss are some remediation efforts. And jump ahead a little bit, one of the best things you can do with respect to business email compromise is to train your staff using tools like KnowBe4, which is a K2 favorite tool that we talk about, or Go Fish, to teach your people and actually give them some real world experience on what a social engineering attack is. So when they face it in the wild, they'll be prepared. They'll be prepared for it. So, Randy,
yeah, in fact, you're right, Steve. We have so many more things. I'm actually thinking, we could go for 8 hours and probably not get through everything, and we're not repeating ourselves much. And so, the goal here will be to teach you some of these other concepts.
Yep. And, in part 2 of this class, just to get you primed up, I think we'll probably discuss a little bit more with some of the different attack types and some ways that you can educate yourself and to be aware of them. And then also giving you some steps to prepare yourself. I think it's so easy to scare people and not give them any sort of resources to prepare themselves, but we really want to give you the tools necessary to defend yourselves. Give a man a fish, feed him for a day, teach a man to fish, feed him for a lifetime. We want to give you that, teach you how to fish here. And I'm using the P word, the fish, PHISH, so that you could see what'll happen and be able to put some resources in place in your organization to lock it down and hopefully prevent this from occurring to you. And so we're going to go ahead and wrap up here today. We'll have this next episode out in the coming weeks and months. So please, again, stay tuned, watch our social media, subscribe to our newsletter, and you'll be aware when that next episode will pop up. Now, again, I want to remind you, if you are watching or listening, you can receive CPE credits for today's presentation. Super simple. Again, head over to cpetoday.com. Today's course code is PADB. You'll take a short 5-question quiz and you'll earn a credit for today's class. And again, if you are a new watcher or listener, use coupon code ONEFREEPODCAST to check out to make today's broadcast or any other podcast if you're choosing 100% free. I would encourage you to connect with us on social media. Randy and I both have our own social media. You can connect with K2 as well as CPE Today on pretty much every network, YouTube, Facebook, and more. And the K2 CPE Today podcast, again, is produced twice a week live, where you can watch live and earn credits live, or you can consume it wherever you happen to receive your content, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and elsewhere. Randy, any final thoughts before we sign off for today?
Well, there's so much to learn. We are encouraging you to be careful out there. Again, we're not trying to scare you. We're trying to position you to be much better protected, and we will have much more for you in the future episodes.
As always, my good friend, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for all of you listening, and we'll see you back in the office the next time around. Thank you, best wishes, and good luck.